All right. Good morning. Daf Yomi for the month is sponsored by Michael Tzaidi in honor of making his first forthcoming siyum with our amazing shul in the Horayos Hatzlacha with making aliyah, and in honor of his late father Zohar ben Ruvain Zichron Livracha. Daf Yomi is sponsored for the month by Moshe and Susie Feder, Lili Nishmas, Mr. Feder's father, Aryeh ben Michal, whose yortzeit was on the 15th of Elul, and Lili Nishmas, Mr. Feder's mother, Roiza Bas Simcha HaKohen, whose yortzeit was on the 18th of Elul. May their neshamos have an aliyah. Amen. And Daf Yomi for the week is sponsored by Aaron and Evelyn Kislasi. B'schus refuah shlema for Aaron's first cousin, Sarah Bat Aziza. So, okay, we're going to continue from about 7 lines from the bottom. The Ilu Mashiach B'avodas Kochavim Lo Katani. The Mishnah had mentioned that we are going to compare the offering that the Kohen Gadol, the big Kohen, the big Kahuna, as they say, right? That his offering is brought in similar circumstances we learned as when the court makes a ruling error, and requires a ruling and it requires an erroneous act. So when it comes to idolatry, when it comes to the offering, special offering, when they make a mistake regarding idolatry, the Mishnah simply says that the court is not liable unless they make a mistake, and the community follows. But it does not say that that is also the ruling by the Kohen Gadol. So the Mishnah wants to know, it doesn't say in the Mishnah that the rule also is similar, that the Kohen Gadol is like the Beis Din when it comes to the idolatry offering. So Masnis and Mani, so who's this Mishnah like? This Mishnah seems to imply that the Kohen Gadol, if the error that he makes is regarding Avodah Zarah, idolatry, that he's going to bring an offering even if he doesn't make a ruling. So who's that like? That's Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi's opinion. The Tanya, as we learned in a Brisa, Mashiach ba'avodos kochavim, when a Kohen Gadol, and it's relating to the Avera regarding idolatry. Rabbi says b'shigagas ma'isa. He's like, although the offering is a little different, but his mistaken action is also going to warrant an offering, even if he doesn't make a erroneous ruling first. The Chachamim disagree. They say behelam davar, that there needs to be a mistaken ruling first, just like any other prohibition. The Shavim, but you know what they agree on? Shebesira, they agree that if the Kohen does incur the offering is a goat, because the verse clearly states that's what's going to happen. Vishavin, and they're also going to agree she'ein mevei asham tolui, that if he is not sure if he made an error, the Kohen Gadol is not going to bring this dependent offering, the situation where he's not sure. He's not going to bring that offering. Nobody thinks that the Kohen Gadol ever brings that. So, v'tizbira, now, does this make logical sense? Bizdono kares ubishigagaso chatos miktani. When it says by the Mishnah that's upcoming, right, and it talks about the rules of Beis Din, it says that the rule of Beis Din is that the only type of sin that they have to make an erroneous ruling in, that the congregation follows, that they're liable for a community offering, is the type of sin that if they do it on purpose, if that sin were to be done by an individual on purpose, they would get the kares penalty. They would be cut off spiritually, right? And if they then do it negligently, they would bring a regular sin offering. Then if the community does that sin, so then they're going to bring the special bull offering. And it doesn't say that that's the same ruling as regards to the Kohen, despite the fact that we know clearly that that is true, right? That it's going to be the same thing. Ella, and so therefore, Ella tani ha vehu hadin laha. Rather, what you have to say in the Mishnah over there is, because even Rabbi doesn't disagree with that. Rather, what you have to say is that the Mishnah only specifies what the rule of Beis Din is, but it doesn't specify what the rule of the Kohen Gadol is. You're just supposed to understand that it's the same rule. Hachanami here in our Mishnah is the same way. Taniha v'hu adin leha. That it's the same rule, right? Even though our Mishnah only says the rule by the court, it's the same rule by the Kohen because they have the same rules. And so therefore our Mishnah is not Rebbe. However, we do know that they have an argument, right? There is this argument. Our Mishnah is not following Rebbe. Our Mishnah is following everybody else's opinion. But there is this dispute as to whether a Kohen Gadol needs to have an erroneous ruling first in order to be liable for the sin offering for idolatry. So my time of the Rebbe. why does Rabbi hold that there's a distinction? Why would he say that when it comes to this sin of idolatry, the rules that make one liable are different than with regards to any other avera? So Amar Kra, because the pasuk says, "V'chaper hakohen al hanefesh hashogeges b'chat'ah," right? That the kohen is going to get atonement for the sin, for the soul that is negligent with his sin. Bishgaga hanefesh ze Mashiach, hashogeges ze nasi. Now, in this paragraph that's discussing the avodah zarah, this idolatrous, the offering for the idolatry, it has these extra phrases. The nefesh, the soul that we're talking about, that's the Kohen. He's included in this, which means that he's going to bring this, and then it also includes the nasi as well. Bechet'ah bishgaga. Then it says when he sins with a negligence. So Rabbi holds that what this means, the pasuk is meaning is chata ze bishgaga yehei, right? That this sin, unlike any of the others, why is he specified differently in this pasuk? In order to tell me that the ruling in this pasuk is any type of negligence, even without an erroneous ruling first, the nasi and the kohen are going to be liable. Okay, and they're going to bring it regardless. So basically, Rabbi says, you read the pasuk about idolatry, it seems to say that the rule by these individuals that normally don't bring a individual offering is the same as the rule by individuals in this case. For Rabbanon Savri, the Rabbanon say, that's not how you read the verse. That's not what this verse is coming to tell me. Mishechatas o bishgaga, it's somebody whose sin is negligent, Yatza Mashiach, which is going to exclude the Kohen who's negligent, she'ein chataso bishgaga, because he doesn't bring a sin offering when he acts negligently. This pasuk says, you know who brings this idolatry offering? Somebody who acts negligently when he sins and brings an offering, which is not true of the Kohen. As we know, he has to have a teaching and then an erroneous action. Just the erroneous action by itself isn't going to give him the obligation to bring a sacrifice. Ela behelam davar, he needs to have an erroneous ruling as well. But the Nasi, right? The Nasi, of course, would, because the Nasi does bring the offering when he makes a negligent action, even without an erroneous ruling. The Shavin shebeseira ki yachid. Now, the next thing is that despite the fact that they read this verse in two different ways, and one excludes the anointed Kohen and one includes the anointed Kohen, they agree that the offering that they are going to bring when they are obligated is going to be this goat for idolatry, just like any other individual. Minolan, why is that the case? Maybe they're going to be bringing their bull offering, which is the offering they bring in their circumstance for their sins. Damar Kra, the pasuk says, nefesh achas, if one soul, echad yachid, ve'echad nasi, ve'echad mashiach, is telling me that this is the rule for all individuals, whether that individual is the nasi or he's the anointed Kohen, it does not matter. Kulam bichlam nefesh achas, and since they're all individuals, this offering, this goat, applies to them, and it overrules the offering that they would otherwise be bringing. In the Kohen's case, the bull, he doesn't bring that; he brings this goat instead. Okay, so that is why they have where they have the argument. Then the last thing we mentioned is v'shavin sheni v'asham tolui, that the Kohen, the anointed Kohen, both Rabbi and the Chachamim agree, he never brings this dependent offering, right? That we had learned before Minolan. How do we know that? Tichsiv, because it says by the dependent offering, v'chaper alav haKohen al shigagaso asher shagag. The Kohen, when he brings that offering for another person, right, he's going to atone for his negligence that he was negligent. So Rabbi explains, Misha kochat o bishgaga, yatzazesh en kochatas o bishgaga. He interprets it and says, who's the person who always has to bring, who brings this type of asham totally, this dependent offering? Somebody who every time he does every one of his averos, what the triggering action for bringing a korban chatas, for bringing a sin offering, is his act of negligence. That is not true of the Kohen. Other than, according to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, other than when it comes to avodah zarah, normally his sin offering is not triggered unless there's an erroneous ruling plus the action. Therefore, he's not eligible for this offering, and therefore, in the verse related to this offering, he's excluded. So this offering never applies to a Kohen, an anointed Kohen. Ela behelam davar, he has normally to have an erroneous ruling besides his action in order to bring his sacrifice. Therefore, he is out by technicality from the Asham Toli. Now, Midi, let's take a look at this. Kol ksiv, it doesn't say in the pasuk that he has to have every one of his sin offerings has to be triggered by a negligent act, but some of them certainly are. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi just said that his negligence can trigger a sin offering by idolatry, right, without an erroneous ruling. So the answer is no, that's what he interprets the verse that way. Rabbi says that it means all of his sin offerings have to be triggered by a negligent act without an erroneous ruling. That's not the case by this Kohen, this anointed Kohen. De'im kain, because if it was not that way, if that was the case, nichtov al shigagaso, all it would have had to say is one time that the Kohen, when he brings this Asham Toli, this dependent offering, he is causing a forgiveness for the negligent act of the person who brought it. Lama li asher shagag. Why does it then double down and say he's atoned for the negligent act that he was negligent when he performed? It means hakamash malon. This is what that extra phrase means. It atones, he reads the pasuk, means that the Kohen is going to bring in atonement for his negligence that this person who always brings the sin offering through negligence is going to bring. But a person whose offerings don't always come by pure negligence is not going to bring this offering. Okay? So Yatsa Mashiach will read the parentheses. Sometimes the text is fixed up when it comes to Maseches Horayos with the parentheses. Yatsa Mashiach, that's going to exclude the anointed Kohen, She'en Kolchat O Bishgaga, that all of his sin offerings are not triggered by a negligent act. Usually, it needs to have a erroneous ruling first. The only time a negligent act is going to trigger a sin offering for him is when it comes to idolatry, according to Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. V'lo b'shar mitzvos, which is not the case by other commandments, ela behelam davar, and other commandments, his offering is triggered by a erroneous ruling and im shigas ma'asav with a negligent act. V'rabbanan, now the rabbis, right, they don't need to worry about that double language. It's much simpler for them because they'd hold there's never a circumstance where the Kohen is going to bring an offering where he simply was negligent. They always, even when it comes to idolatry, they disagree with Rabbi Yehuda. Even when it comes to idolatry, you need an erroneous ruling plus a negligent act. For Rabbana Mishech et Obish Gaga, this pasuk says that he's going to bring this offering for a person whose sins are through negligence. Yatsa Mashiach, which is going to exclude the anointed Kohen, She'ein Chat Obish Gaga. His korban chatas, his sin offering, does not come just for being negligent. Lo ba'avodos kochavim v'lo b'shar mitzvos. Not when it comes to idolatry, and not when it comes to any other mitzvah. Ela behelam davar, needs to have a negligent ruling im shigagas ma'isa with the negligent act. Okay, so therefore we come to the conclusion that our Mishnah, even though it's not clear, our Mishnah is according to the rabbis, and that the rabbis are consistent with their ruling that the Kohen is always like the Beis Din. You need an erroneous ruling, then a negligent act in order to trigger his sin offering, and everybody agrees that the Asham Tolui, this dependent offering, is off the table always for him. Okay, now we'll get to the next Mishnah. The next Mishnah says, this rule about this erroneous ruling that a community Beis Din that the Sanhedrin, the Beis Din would make, right? And the people followed it. Ein Beis Din chayavin, they're not liable ad sheyoru bedavar shezadono kares, like we said. The type of sin, the type of erroneous ruling that they're making has to be the type of sin that if an individual were to commit that sin, the punishment would be kares. What is kares? Kares means spiritually being cut off. It can alternatively mean that your days are halved, right? You don't live to half of your days. Let's say we presume that somebody lives till 70 or so. So somebody dies at 35 or thereabouts. Somebody could also die without children, or somebody could be cut off from their world to come, their share in the world to come. So any of those outcomes are the consequence of doing a sin.
Like when he hit the rock, he was cut off from going to Israel.
I don't know that works, right? Because kares is coming off from Olam Haba, not coming off from this world, right? So kares averos, right, is the general when the Torah doesn't otherwise specify, may presume it to be kares. The quintessentials we're going to see in this Gemara, quintessential averos that have to do with kares are immoral relationships, right? Somebody has relations with somebody that they're otherwise not allowed to. We're going to see the source for these averos of kares are going to be if a person marries his wife's sister, for example, right? A person is not allowed to marry two sisters simultaneously. If one dies, he can then marry the other one, but he cannot be simultaneously married to two sisters. That's illegal relationships. The punishment for that is kares. If a person acts negligently, right? Let's say he didn't realize that was prohibited, or he didn't know who he was marrying, right? He didn't know it. So then he would bring a sin offering, korban chatos.
Like, when comes Rachel and Leah?
Rachel and Leah are the quintessential example. And how did Yaakov do that is a commentary question, right? How does Yaakov do it? Whether the avos, whether the forefathers were not responsible for the Torah commandments before the giving of the Torah, or whether he was able to do it because he wasn't living in Eretz Yisrael potentially, or whether they were obligated to do positive commandments but not negative commandments. All various interpretations given by the commentaries. But yes, that is the exact question. Why is he doing that? And Zilpah and Bilhah, incidentally, because they're also sisters, potentially also as well. So even though they were the maidservants, right, they were from other wives of Lavan, they were also his daughters and therefore also sisters, potentially problematic too. But only according to some opinions. Now, that's coffee break. Okay, so now, back to work. So a basin's not going to be liable for this. They're not going to bring this community offering unless that's the type of avera. As we said also, we have other rules about that. It can't be the entire rule. It only has to be part of the rule. But we're getting the hang of this. The Maseches Horayos is a pretty wordy Masechta in that it seems to repeat the same ideas again and again. So at least as soon as you get them, it should feel fairly consistent. Like I knew that before already. So. The Chein HaMashiach, same thing when it comes to the Kohen Gadol. Same thing. His offering is not brought unless it's a type of a avera that required that would get you kares on purpose and would get you a sin offering negligently if you were an individual. Velo ba'avodos kochavim. Now this is why we picked on this when we just mentioned it before. This Mishnah says. And not when it comes to the basin, also when it comes to idolatry, it doesn't mention the Kohen. Although it's clearly the case when it comes to nobody disagrees with that. It has to be part of the Avera of Avodah Zarah that you are liable to a kares and bringing a sin offering for. Not if you do part of Avodah Zarah where you're liable to the death penalty. As we learned in Maseches Sanhedrin, that there are types of idolatrous actions that get you the death penalty. If you bow down to an idol, if you burn incense to an idol, if you pour libations to the idol. So those are normal methods of worship. We said, those were the...
You're in defense respectful for the idol as well.
If you remember that when we said it in Sanhedrin, the rule was basically that if the action is an action that is used in the Beis HaMikdash to service Hashem, then you do that, then that could net you a death penalty. Also, if you service the idol in a way that idol is normally serviced. However, if you show respect and deference to an idol, but it's not the normal way of servicing it, then that's not going to be a death penalty, right? If somebody sweeps the floor before to clean up for the idol, but that's not a service, that's not normally a way of serving it, that is prohibited, and that would be this sort of avera, but it would not be a death sentence. Therefore, only of those ones that are applied to kares and a korban chatas and a sin offering apply. Yeah.
This may not be the best time for this question, but it sounds related enough. What about Christians? They honestly believe they're serving Hashem like we do, but from an objective perspective, they're worshiping idols.
Right.
So what happens to them?
So it's a great question. The question that you're asking is, we have a concept in Judaism of the tinok shenishba. Somebody is captured as a baby and raised not Jewish, right? And they don't keep Shabbos, right? So is that person liable when they violate Shabbos, right? As a Jewish person. And the the Gemara's understanding is that is not the case, right? If he's doesn't even know, he's just aware of these things, these rules, he can't be held even as negligent, right? He just completely knows it's not his fault. So the question would be, do we have such a concept by an idolater? I would presume the answer is yes. If they're raised under the false presumption that this is the right way of serving God, can they be punished? But I'm not 100% sure, because we know that when we learned the rules of idolatry, right? We had of the 7 Noachide laws, they were much stricter, right? In other words, there was a presumption that there was a logic to these things that there were no exceptions to these rules. So I don't know, right? I don't know the answer exactly, but there would be logic to say that they wouldn't be responsible. I would hope the answer is that they wouldn't be responsible, and that if they find out, right? The question is, what makes somebody a tinok shenishba? Tinok shenishba means that they have no way of finding out the things that they're doing wrong. A person who grows up now with the internet and in the United States and has the opportunity to read online and find out their own information about things, is he really truly somebody who has no opportunity to learn? Or, as we say, at least there's a responsibility for every person to do some exploration and find for themselves the right answers to things. And if they are incurious or lazy to be able to find out what is true and what is right, that may not make somebody a tinok shenishba. So I will put that, we call this tzarech iyun, that's the Gemara language, which means that we're supposed to, that needs to be investigated further in greater detail. So I'm just presenting the various sides, not sure what the answer to that would be. Okay, so now the Gemara wants to know, minolon, where is the source for this law that the prohibition that we're discussing has to be one, that you do it on purpose, then you get kares. You do it negligently, you bring the sin offering. Tanya, we learn in a brisa. Rebbe says, Nemar kan aleha, right? So if this is the source for the original source, what we're going to do is, right, just to be able to follow exactly what's going to happen here, we are going to find one source for a law, and then we're just going to link everything else to that law eventually, so that we know that it applies in all of these other cases as well. So the first thing is, let's start off with this. Rabbi says, Nemar kan aleha v'nemar lehalan aleha. It says when it comes to the sisters that are getting married, to this man, right? That the pasuk says that the v'noda chatasa shechatu aleha. Right, a person becomes aware by a sin offering. So the person becomes aware of the sin offering that they sinned upon it, and the congregation is going to bring this offering. So that's the congregational bull sin offering. And then it says also, by the sisters who get married, it also says aleha. That's this pasuk that says, Isha el achosa lo sikach, you cannot marry two sisters. So, what's the punishment if you marry two sisters? Malahalan davar shezadono kares v'shigos ochatos. It's clearly in that pasuk, right, that you're supposed, that the punishment for all Horayos, all of these prohibited relationships in the Torah is that you get kares if you do it on purpose, and you have to bring a sin offering if you do it through negligence. Afkan, so too, when we're talking about the community offering, the community bull offering, that's where we're going to start. The community bull offering is davar shezadono kares v'shigos atos. Also, that only applies in the same circumstances. Mitzvos like this one, where you get kares if you do it on purpose, and if you're negligent, you bring a sin offering. Okay, so that's where we start. We're now at the bull offering for the community. That's all we know. We don't know about the Kohen Gadol. We don't know about individual offering. We don't know about anything else. Okay, now, Ashkechan Tzibur. We now know that this is the rule by the general community. Mashiach Minola. Now, this one is predictable. How are we going to link the offering, the rules, by the community offering to the Kohen Gadol? Well, we've been doing that all day yesterday. Ashmas Ha'am. From that pasuk that says by the Kohen, that when the Kohen sins, it's to the guilt of the nation. At least it's not the guilt of the nation, it's his Avera. The answer is, his rules, right? His rules are the same as the rules of the bull of the general nation. So therefore that applies to him now. So we know that rule applies to the Kohen Gadol as well with his special offering. Harei Mashiach Ketzibur. That means that the anointed Kohen follows the same rules as the congregation. If the congregational offering requires this type of Avera, so too the Kohen Gadol does. Now, Nasi, where do we know that this is the rule about the Nasi, the president, as well? Yalef mitzvos, because we have another Gzera Shabbat. It says the word mitzvos in two different places. Ksiv gabe Nasi, by the president, that's what we said we're calling him, this leader of the Jewish people. It says, V'asa achas mikol mitzvos Hashem, if he transgresses and does one of these mitzvos that Hashem says with negligence, then he's going to bring his special goat offering, as we said. Uksiv betzibur, now we're going to link him back to the community offering as well, because the pasuk says by the community offering, V'asu achas mikol mitzvos, that they do one of the mitzvos as well. Matzibor davar shezadono kars v'shigos ochatos. Just like the community bull offering is only brought when it's an avera that if you do it, you get kares. If you do it negligently, you bring a sin offering. Afnasi, so too the same rule applies by the president. Davar shezadono kars v'shigos ochatos. It's going to mean that his offering is only brought when he does that type of avera. Yochid, what about an individual? How do we know that this is the rule by an individual? Amar Kra, the pasuk says, "V'im nefesh." If it's an individual, if a individual, this is right. One person, right, does this avera. So the yilmad tachton me'elyon, and we're going to learn that this rule, because this section comes right after the section about the community offering, and so therefore the verse starts off by an individual with a vav, which means it connects the individual's offering to the previous section, which talks about the community offering. Just like the communal offering requires this, so too the individual's offering of a sin offering is only brought when it's an avera like marrying two sisters. So that's how we know. We know it by the community offering. Then we learn over to the then from the community offering, we're going to compare that to the anointed Kohen. Then we're going to compare that to the president. Then we're going to compare it also to the individual. So everybody gets compared back to the community offering, and the community offering of Gzera Shava back to Kares. Now, velo ba'avodas kochavim ad sheyoru. Now, this is also by the Beis Din, is we're going to say that it also doesn't apply by idolatry. Also, you need this ruling in this type of avera also. So the one thing we didn't say is we learned this by the regular, right? All of the other, we compared everything to the regular type of averos. But where is avodas kochav minolan? Where are we going to connect? How are we going to connect the special offering that's brought by idolatry back to the community offering, which is brought by every other mitzvah? The Tana Rabbanan, our rabbis learned, avodas kochav lidon be'atzma. The section of the Torah we said was in Bamidbar about idolatry. It's a completely separate section from the community offering, which is in Vayikra. You might think it has its own set of rules, right? They're not connected, right? That's why Hashem wrote them in two separate places in the Torah. Nemar kan me'einei v'nemar lehalan me'einei. We pull out yesterday's Gzera Shava me'einei from a book like we had yesterday. That was Jeff's wormhole. And we said that it connects, right? That we are going to connect the two rules back to the community offering. Just like the community bull offering requires that we are going to need this special type of avera, afkan. So too, when it comes to the idolatrous ruling, it also has to be a ruling that where you do it negligently, then you get you bring a sin offering, you do it on purpose, you get kares. Okay, ashkechan tzibur. Now that's great because that comparison is to when the community is bringing this special goat offering for idolatry. So what about an individual or a Nasi Mashiach? What about an individual or a president or the Kohen Mashiach or the anointed Kohen? What happens if they do the Avodah Zarah? They're, right, because that is an individual's Avodah Zarah offering. How do we connect that back? Because the Amar Kra, we just did that at the beginning of the page we started today. Because the pasuk says, Ve'im nefesh achas, that this rule applies to an individual as well. Echad Yachid ve'echad Nasi ve'echad Mashiach kulan bichlal nefesh achas. Hey, these are all individuals. Hence, the rule is all the same. They're all going to bring this goat offering under the same circumstance. The Yilma Tachton Min Ha'elyon. We're going to learn the second section, since it says Ve'im Nefesh Achas, if, and, again, the Vav connects and says, if the individual who commits the idolatrous ruling, where do we know how it connects? That's going to link back to the community idolatrous offering. So now we have like a train here. The individual's idolatrous ruling is similar to the community's idolatrous ruling. The community's idolatrous ruling is connected back through Me'ene, back to the community offering for all other Averos. And we know that the community offering for all other Averos is only if it applies to these types of Averos only. Hanicha, so that's great. We've got this whole train, everything basically is now connected, and we're all in great shape. And most of the nice thing about it is most of those connections we already knew. So there's not a lot of new stuff there. Like we get it. These rules are all basically the same even though they're written in different sections, there's a lot of connectors that connect them all together. The only problem is that's great, except for one thing, and that is the wrench in the works is in Maseches Yevamos. The Maseches Yevamos is in Maseches Yevamos, we learn that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says that, and that's who's been quoting this the whole time. This phrase Aleha, right, is going to be Gzera Shava. How do we know that the community bull offering is brought for this type of avera? Because we linked the word Aleha back to the case of marrying two sisters. But fine, according to the most opinions that say that that word is extra and is available for this teaching, that's great. Then everything is kedam ran, everything as we just said. El Rabbanan. But what about according to the Rabbanan's opinion? Demafki lo le'aleha la'arayos vitsaros. So they say that this word aleha is already used for something else. And not to get too technical, because it's in Maseches Yevamos. But here's what this means. When a man dies, he's married, and he dies, so without children, so then his brother has the responsibility of carrying his name forward by marrying his wife. However, they can either get married, that's called yibum, or they can decide not to get married, which is called chalitza. That's what's normally done, is they get like a divorce, right, a mini divorce. Now, the rule is that if the wife that is married to the brother is prohibited from marrying the other brother for some reason, then there's no need to go through any of the chalitza ceremony. For example, a person is allowed to marry their niece. Okay? So, if this person marries his niece and then dies, the brother can't marry her because that's his daughter. So therefore, since he can't marry that person, so now he doesn't have to do yibum, he doesn't have to do chalitza. The Torah tells us through this word aleha that not only is that the case of the woman herself, but let's say a man is married to two wives. He has no children from either of them. He has no children. He has married to two wives. One of them is his niece. One of them is just somebody else, not related at all. Since the niece has no obligation to do yibum or chalitza, the other wife does not either. We get into those rules when we get to Yevamos, all the way around the bend. But that is not. There's no ceremonies necessary. She's just free to marry whoever she wants after her husband dies.
So she's like a free agent.
She's a free agent immediately, right? And what's critical about all that when you get to Maseches Yevamos is that a Kohen is not allowed to marry a woman who's gone through chalitza. So therefore, it's very advantageous for a woman to not need chalitza, right? Because she can then, if she gets remarried, she can get remarried to a Kohen. She doesn't have to get remarried to somebody who's not a Kohen. So it's advantageous that chalitza is not necessary, right? So, now they use this word, aleha, as part of that ruling, as part of that teaching. Okay, that goes into the details over there. But the point is that if you use this word aleha to teach me rules over there in Yevamos, you can't use it here to connect from the wife's sister case to the community offering to tell me that a community's offering is only brought when it has to do with kares. So therefore, the whole chain is broken from the beginning. We have no source to know that the community bull offering is brought in only these circumstances. So that's good. We have to rewrite everything. Okay? Now, the nice thing is, just before we rewrite everything is, all of the links of all of these laws to each other still are in effect. We just need somehow to link that it is a prohibition that results in kares and a korban chatos and a sin offering that is linked to this group in some way. So, according to the opinion that says aleha is la'arayos vitsaros, for the leniency that says that the woman who is an erva, she's prohibited to the brother, and her co-wives don't have to get remarried. Davar shezadono kares v'shigos chatos minolahu. Where do we learn this rule that you need to have an avera that the negligent action results in sin offering and the intentional action results in kares? How do I know that those are the only times you bring a sin offering in all of these cases? So the answer is nafka lahu midemasni la minasni le Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi libre. The answer is we have to take a look at how Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi taught his son. He taught it differently. He didn't say the source was from the sister marrying the wife's sister. He said it's from someplace else. Torah says, Pasuk says, Torah achas yeh lachem laoseh bishgaga. Right. There's one ruling, one law for the natural born Jewish person and a convert. They all have the same rules. For somebody who does a sin negligently. However, if a person, and the little translation is with a high hand. What is high hand? High hand means that you do it on purpose. So the Torah is telling us that every type of Jew, whether you're born Jewish, whether you're a convert, you can bring, if you do an Aveira, if you did a sin through negligence, you can bring an offering to the Beis HaMikdash. However, if you do your sin through negligence, not through negligence, on purpose, you can't, right? You only bring a sin offering through negligence. Okay, so now, so that verse is talking about a sin that's done, that's in Bamidbar, so that's talking about when you do idolatry. So, Huksha kol haTorah kula la'avodas kochavim. So all of the rules in the Torah are now connected to idolatry. Ma'avodas kochavim. In what circumstance are you going to bring a sin offering for idolatry? Shechayavin al zadono kares. It's a circumstance that if you did it, because this pasuk says, if you do it on purpose, right? Now, by the way, this pasuk never makes it clear that we're talking about idolatry. The Gemara is presuming that these psukim talk about idolatry. They're in Bamidbar, and if you read them inside, it only says if a person does his sin on purpose, he brings an offering. If he does it through negligence, he brings he brings a sin offering. He does it on purpose, he brings no offering. And we're presuming it means idolatry. Why? Because the Gemara is going to explain that later on, right? Why are we presuming these psukim talk about idolatry? But understanding what we will know in a little bit, these psukim talk about idolatry. And it tells us that if one commits an Aveira, that if you did it on purpose, you would get kares. If you did it negligently, you would bring a sin offering. Now, this, we said that all of the Torah, and it says, Torah achas yeh lachem, this is the one law for all things. So this tells me that all of the laws are now linked to idolatry, right? Just like when it comes to these sins of idolatry, if you do them on purpose, you get kares, and if you do them negligently, you bring a korban chatas. Afkan shechayavin al zdono kares val shigos chatas. So therefore, that is the rule for every person. Any avera that you do, if you do it negligently, you bring a sin offering. If you do it on purpose, you don't bring anything. That's the rule now for an individual doing any avera.
So if you do it purposely, what's the punishment for that?
Then the punishment is going to be kares. Right? If you do it purposely, kares. If you do it negligently, sin offering. So doing tshuva, right? Kares is getting cut off, spiritually cut off. Good. There you go, right? Got to remember, get to link the words. Good. So now, we're going now backwards, essentially. We've now, instead of the last step, linking the individual offering, we're starting with the individual offering. The individual now know that an individual offering is brought when the sin is negligent. If you did it on purpose, you would get kares. If you did it negligently, now you bring a sin offering. That's the rule, ashkechan yachid. Now that's the rule by an individual bringing his own sin offering. Nasi Mashiach, what about an individual who is a president or an individual who is an anointed Kohen? How do we learn that? Bein bavos kav bein b'shar mitzvos, tzibor minolan. How are we going to learn that? By idolatry or any other mitzvah? Yolef el yomi tachton. We're going to go backwards what we said before. Remember that the pasuk said ve'im nefesh, right? The vav connected the lower section to the top section, right? So we're going to connect backwards and say, just like the lower section is talking about the individual Kohen and the individual president who works brings his offering in the same circumstances as an individual person brings it, we're going to say that that's now also the circumstances when it comes to the community sin offering. And we then go back and say, well, the community brought offering, the community Avodah Zarah offering is now related back to the community bull offering, and that's now we're going to now bring everything back in. Everything is now connected again, and we have a new source. Now, the question is going to be, we understand why Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi can't hold like Rabbi, because he can't use the word aleha. The Rabbi Hod Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, my Ovidle, the question is going to be, what does Rabbi do with this interpretation that Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi uses? It's very nice. So Mapik Le Lichadetanya, he uses it according to that which we learn in a brisa. Lefi shematzinu shecholak hakosav bein rabim liyechidim. So the pasuk makes a distinction when an individual does avodah zarah and when the community does avodah zarah. If an individual on his own does idolatry, so then he gets a punishment of skila, right? Stoning. That is under the circumstance where the punishment is a death penalty. The individual, right? If the community does it, we said that we attack the city and everybody gets killed with swords and we destroy all their property. So rabim, so we make a distinction between individuals and the community when it comes to how the death sentence gets carried out. Rabim besayif, in the circumstance of death penalty, the city gets wiped out with a sword. Umamonon avad, and their money, we said, was destroyed. Yechidim, but individuals beskila, they get stoned. Umamonon palat, but their possessions can remain and get handed over to their heirs. Yachol nachlok bekorban osayim. We might therefore presume that there should be some kind of distinction between if they do it negligently and they're going to bring a sacrifice, they should also, an individual and the community should have two different rules by sacrifices. Talmud Lomar, therefore the pasuk says, Torah achasiyah, there's one rule. It doesn't matter whether you're an individual or the community, the rule is the same when you bring the sin offering. Okay? Now it's a different sin offering, but the rules are going to be the same that apply. It has to be something that you're going to get kares for if you do it on purpose, and then you do it negligently, you bring a chatos. Now, what is right? So that explains how everybody's going to do it. Now, maskifla Rav Chilkiah mehagronya, right? Rav Chilkiah from Hagronya asks the following question: Taima de lo cholak hakosov. The reason why is the pasuk is now making no distinction between these two. Ha-cholak, if there would have been a distinction, havamina nachlok, so we would have said, okay, so what was your presumption? Rabbi, you're suggesting that if the Torah didn't specifically tell us that an individual brings the same offering as the community, then we would have thought they bring different offerings. So my nicey, what would you have assumed they brought? We don't have a Torah anywhere telling us that an individual would bring a different offering. Therefore, of course they would bring the offering that the community would bring. Where would you invent a new offering from? Where are they going to get that from? So, Nasi Par, what are you going to bring? You're not going to bring the goat offering. The goat offering is what the community brings for Avodah Zarah. Of course they'll bring the goat. Why? What are their choices? They're going to bring a bull? Tzibor b'shar mitzvos hudamaisu. That's not their offering. That's the offering that the community brings for other Averos. Naisi Par la'ola usir lechatos. What? They're going to bring the bull offering as a burnt offering and the goat as a sin offering. Tzibor b'avodas kechavim hudamaisu. That's what the community brings when they do Avodah Zarah. Naisi seir. What? They're going to bring the goat that's male goat. That won't work. Nasi b'shar mitzvos hudamaisi. That's the nasi sacrifice. Naisi seira. What about bringing a female goat? That wouldn't work because Yachid Nami, Hainu Korban, that's the regular offering that he brings on other Averos. So therefore, what choice would he have? There are no other options. Whatever animal you bring already is assigned to a different circumstance. So the answer is, Alamallah, why not? Itzrich, because I need it, because Salka Daita Chamina, you know what he would bring? Could be Tzibor Maisi Parla Ola Vasir Lechatos. It says that the community is going to bring a bull for a burnt offering and a goat for a sin offering. So if we would have presumed the offering is different, we would have just presumed, Hani Naisi Ibcha, that you flip it, which is a weird sort of presumption to make, but just flip it and bring the goat as the burnt offering and the bull as the sin offering. Par lechatas asir le'olah. Inami, or the other possibility is tzarech vein lo takana, that he has to bring a sacrifice, but the Torah tells us there is no sacrifice. So he's stuck, right? He needs an atonement, and the Torah doesn't provide him one. So therefore, Kamash Malan, that no, he brings the same offering as the community would, brings the goat, and that's what an individual would bring. Okay. Dekuli alma mihas kiksivi hani kroi ba'avoros kochavim hu diksivi. Everyone agrees, though, this was our problem, that if you read Bamidbar, that section in Bamidbar is talking about idolatry. But my mashma, there's no words in the pasuk, there's no words in that verse that talk about idolatry. What makes you say that it's talking about idolatry? So Amar Rava, so Rava says Vitim Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, some says Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi. The Amri Law Kiddi, and some said it was Kiddi. Now here, what is Kiddi? Kiddi is either the name of an Amora or Kiddi means anonymous. right? So it's either Kadi or an anonymous that we're assessing it to somebody where we don't know the name. Amar Kra, the pasuk says, and this is the pasuk in Bamidbar. V'chi sishgu v'lo sa'asu es kol mitzvos ha'ela. When you make a negligent action and you don't do one of the commandments, Asher diber Hashem Moshe, Hashem told to Moshe. Okay, that's what the pasuk says. Ezo hi mitzvah shehi shekula kechol hamitzvos. What it says, you made a mistake, and now by making that mistake, it's as though, it's a liberal reading of the pasuk, you have not done any of the mitzvos. Literally, you haven't done any of them. So what mitzvah could you have not done that would equate to not doing any mitzvos? That's idolatry, because we know idolatry is compared to doing all of the prohibitions in the Torah. So it's a very severe idolatry. So debay Rebbe Tana, and now in Rebbe they learned as follows. Amar Kra, the pasuk says here, Asher diber Hashem al Moshe. This verse is talking about the commands that Hashem spoke to Moshe. Uksiv, and then the next pasuk says, Asher tziva Hashem aleichem, that Hashem commanded to you, biyad Moshe, through the hand of Moshe. Now, what commandment? Ezohi mitzvah shehi b'diburo shel Kodesh Baruch Hu v'tziva al yedei Moshe. What commandment do we have that Hashem literally spoke directly to the Jewish people and then sent it through Moshe? That's the prohibition of idolatry. Where? Ditana debei Rabbi Yishmael. We have a brisa from Rabbi Yishmael. Anochi v'lo yeh lecha. The first two of the 10 commandments, mipiak v'urash ma'unim. The Jewish people heard the first two of the 10 commandments directly from God.
And then we died.
And then we died. Not then, but we died after each one, right? We didn't die after the second one. We died after the first one. God brought us back to life. He said the next one, and then we died again. And then we said, Moshe, we have a better idea. Why don't you hear it and then tell us what Hashem says? Okay? And then the rest of the 8, the last 8, Hashem told Moshe. So that's this. So therefore, when this pasuk says, those mitzvahs that Hashem told you and then went through Moshe, that's avodah zarah. So it's a hint in the pasuk. The Bei Rabbi Yishmael Tana, in the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael, they taught as follows, on to Ches Amud Beis, Lemin hayom asher tziva Hashem v'hala l'doro soichem. That this is talking about the commandment. There's also in that pasuk that chapter 15, verse 23, Tesvav pasuk Chav Gimel. Lemin hayom asher tziva Hashem v'hala, from the day that Hashem spoke to you and onward, l'doro soichem, for all generations. So that means this is the first mitzvah. So, Ezohi mitzvah shehi nemar b'tchila. What is the first mitzvah that Hashem told the Jewish people? Haviyomer zu avodas kochavim. It's idolatry, right? Because that's what it says. I am Hashem your God. Don't have any other gods before me. First of the 10 commandments. First 2 of the 10 commandments. Positive and negative commandments of not worshiping other idols. V'ha mar, but that's not true, because v'ha mar says, Mar says, Esther mitzvos nitztav Yisrael b'mara. The Jewish people received 10 mitzvos before the 10 commandments. In Mara. Dichsiv, as the pasuk says, if you listen to the words of Hashem, what 10 mitzvos they got? Remember, they got the 7 mitzvos b'nei Noach. They were told the 7 Noachite laws you guys still have to keep, right? You're also going to keep Shabbos. You're going to honor your parents, and I'm forgetting one. I can't remember it. Anyways, there's 10 of them. So therefore, these are not the point of it. Matter is that avodah zarah is not the first 2, because there were 10 already before that. Rather, we're going to go back and say the first explanation. We're going to go stick with the first explanation. Next Mishnah. Now, even though we said this rule that this is only going to apply to certain types of mitzvos, the Mishnah specifies, a little unnecessarily, but nevertheless for clarity, that when you have a avera, that the result of the offering that is going to come as a result of doing that avera is not a korban chatos. In this circumstance, we learned about a korban olah v'yored. Right, korban olah v'yored was a sacrifice that if you were rich, you brought an animal. If you were middle range, you brought birds. If you were poor, you brought a meal offering. So that was brought, we said in Masechah Shavuos, when one enters the Beis HaMikdash, when you are impure. Right? That's the korban olah v'yored. So if they make an erroneous ruling regarding purity in the Beis HaMikdash, then the community offering doesn't apply. Because it's not a sin offering. It's a korban olah v'yored. Ve'ein mevi'in Hashem toli al aseh v'alosas shebemikdash. And, right? They're not obligated for the positive, and they don't bring the guilt, they don't bring an asham tolui for that purpose as well. They never bring an asham tolui. Aval, however, however, they are going to bring for positive and negative commandment violations of a nida. What's the positive and negative violations of nida? The negative violations, obviously, a person is not allowed to have relations when she is having a period. And the positive is that a person has the obligation to stay separated from his wife at the time that she's expected to be a nida. So if he is negligent, means that he's having relations and he discovers that she is a nida, so that's the prohibition, but it was negligent, he's going to bring us an offering. If he's negligent, does not realize that this is the day that he's not supposed to be having relations and she has her period, and he didn't realize that and he violated that positive commandment, that is also a violation that would result in a korban chatos because he's having relations with her, so it's a losa. So even though we call it a positive, it's a positive that leads to a negative, and so those are going to be situations where the Beis Din is going to bring an offering. And they're going to bring an asham tolui. We will discuss this. Probably we're not going to have a chance to get to it today. By an asham tolui, by the positive and negative commandments of nida. Ezu mitzvahs aseh shebenida. What is, as we said, the positive command of nida? Perush min nida, the mitzvah of separating from one's wife at the time that she's expected to be a nida. Mitzvahs lo saseh, and the prohibition is al tavo al hanida. Don't have relations with a nida. Minani mili did tzibur lo mechayvi korban bi alma. How do we know that this is the circumstance, that the community is not required to bring this korban olah v'yored offering and also this asham tolui? Amar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi says, Nemar ve'asham, that he's guilty bechat us, right? That he's going to bring. This is by the korban tzibur, right? It says that if the person nefesh achas techet dabish gaga, an individual sins from the Jewish people, and he does one of these mitzvos that you're not supposed to do them, ve'ashem, and he is guilty, right? That's what it says by the regular korban chatas bechatas. Ube asham tolui, and it also says that same thing by the asham tolui. It says, the pasuk says, if a person sins and he does one of these mitzvahs that Hashem says not to, asher lo te'asena, velo yada, but he's not sure if he did it, ve'ashem, it says the word ve'ashem again, and he's guilty. V'nasa avono. So, v'nemar, and then it says, ve'ashemo, but tzibur. Then it also says, by the community offering, it says, if all of the Jewish people do an avera, v'im kol adas Yisrael yishgu, they make an avera, v'ne'elam davar meinei kol kal, and everybody makes a mistake, and they do one of these things, so asher telo tasena, ve'ashemu, and they are guilty. So, ma ve'ashem b'yachid b'chatas kivua, so, just like when it says the word ashem, the guilt offering is brought, that's by an individual. We know that's only by where we're talking about a set sin offering, right? Because that's what the pasuk is talking about, a set sin offering. Af ve'ashemo betzibor bechatas kavua. So too, what would be the circumstance where the community is going to bring their offering? That would be a set sin offering. Umat tzibor bechatas kavua af asham toli nami. So too, that's the rule by an asham toli. An asham toli for an individual only is brought. We know that a korban, the tzibur never brings an asham toli, but the individual brings this asham toli only if he's not sure if he did an avera that he would bring a full-fledged regular chatas offering, not a korban olah v'yored. So if he's not sure if he walked into the Beis Hamikdash impure, and he's not sure if he's required to bring this asham toli, this korban olah v'yored, he doesn't bring it because there's no asham toli for that. Okay. So Asham Toli Nami in ba ella al safek chatas kavua. He has to. That's only brought when there's a doubtful situation. If he has to bring a regular set offering. Amri. So he said ihachi. If that's true, korban olah v'yored nami. So by the korban olah v'yored, it also uses that word ve'ashem. So haksiv va'aki ye'esham lechatas me'ela. So why are we not suggesting if you're going to use the word ashem in order to link the three cases of the individual sin offering, the community sin offering, and the korban olah v'yored to say that they all, and the asham toli to say they all have the same rules together? So then you're excluding the asham toli because it doesn't say it, but does, right? It says the word ve'ashe. It says over there the pasuk. It says ki ye'esham la'achas me'ela. It also uses the word asham. So the answer is don and asham me'ashamo, vein don and asham min ye'esham. The answer is the gzera shav is better. Asham and ashamo are similar words. Asham ye'esham are not as similar. my nafkamina. What are you talking about? It says one little extra letter. V'atani debei Rabbi Shmuel. We learned in the yeshiva Rabbi Shmuel. V'shava kohen ubaha kohen. Zuhi shiva zuhi bia. We have another circumstance of gzer shava. Not important to go into the details, but this gzer shava talks about a kohen goes in and a kohen goes out, and we say it's the same rule, despite the fact that we use the same word. One says return, one says come. The ode, and furthermore, maybe we got to stop. It's number one. So let's stop here. We will pick this this train of thought because it goes all the way to the Mishnah. This train of thought tomorrow. So we will take a break here and pick up tomorrow.